We can start.
Good afternoon. It's my honor and privilege to welcome you to today's edition of BW Dialogue. Today we are discussing the standoff between India and China. It's a military standoff, but it has economic fallout. So we're discussing the road ahead for India. How should India make itself more competitive? How should Indian companies prepare themselves with a China-less economy, if I may use? We will focus on the various facets of these Indo-Chinese business relationships, but we'll also focus on how the geopolitical alignments are happening. We have a special panel with us today. We're joined by Mr. Iqbal Malhotra, who is an entrepreneur. He's a content creator. He's also the author of his second book, which is on China. So welcome, Mr. Malhotra. He's the chairman of AIM Television, and he's dealt with China as a subject for many years, and we are lucky to have him on the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Annurag. Thank you, Annurag.
We also have Mr. S. Ravi. As I said, this is a trade-off at the border, but it has economic impact. So to analyze the economic impact of this geopolitical alignment and the tensions at the border, we have an economic expert. We have the chairman of TFCI, Mr. S. Ravi. He's also the managing partner of S. Ravi and Associates, the former chairman of BSE, been on many bank boards, and he understands the economy and the nuances of the economy. Welcome, Mr. Ravi, to the BW Dialogue. Last but not least, we have somebody who has made a career out of understanding geopolitical issues, understanding how the foreign relations are developing and where they're headed. We have Mr. Moses and Manoharan. He's had a 3-decade stint in journalism and media. He was the head of Reuters in Asia Pacific, and now for many years is the editor-in-chief of the Global Dialogue Review, which is a publication focused on the geopolitics and foreign relations. Welcome, Mr. Moses. Let me start by asking Mr. Malhotra. Today, the Prime Minister visited Ladakh. He made a speech. We all heard that. What should we make of that speech? What should we make of that visit?
Actually, it's very funny. I wrote an article which was published yesterday in the Open magazine called The Quad Against Beijing. And I said that in that article, I said that the negotiations in Chushul and Moldo between the Indian Army and the Chinese Army are taking an unusually long time, because the Indian Army is not willing to compromise this time round, because it has got political support. And the political support has been buttressed and reinforced by what I would call the support from the Quad nations of Australia, Japan, and the US. So at this point of time, when the Prime Minister has just gone to Ladakh and he's given this speech and he is spelled out in no uncertain terms that India is not going to tolerate expansionism, and everybody has to play by the rules of the game. And expansionism could be, whether it could be in the South China Sea or it's in the Himalayas. This is not going to be tolerated and not going to be accepted, which is the strong statement. And these salami slicing tactics by the Chinese of gobbling up our territory and forcing us to back off, and we relenting over the last 70 years in doing so, I think his message is very strong that we've got to hold the line now, and we're not going to be pushed around by the Chinese anymore. So the awe and the sort of fear of the Chinese has suddenly taken a break. And I think this is going to significantly change things and change the perception in which India and the rest of the Quad nations looks at China. And I think that this is not just India's strategy, but it's a combined strategy of the Quad nations, because without this combination of alliances, there wouldn't have been such a firm expression of opinion and policy by Mr. Modi today.
Okay. No, China is very nuanced about what it does. in some way, China is signaling that you can't take us for granted. We are the dominant superpower in Asia. So whether you look at it in the South China Sea, you look at, it's flying its airplanes over another country, doing exercises in the sea with Japan. So is China trying to tell everyone that I am the dominant superpower in Asia and hence you cannot take me for granted? What do you think? Why are the Chinese doing this right now? And where is it headed?
Are you asking me that question?
Yes, Mr.
Well, I think the Chinese have been doing this because let's just go back several months to the US-China trade negotiations, which were happening in 2019. And there are a lot of accounts now that confirm that the Chinese came to know about this Wuhan virus in November 2019. And by the time the world was given a warning, it was I think just in the first half of February 2020 this year. Now the Chinese signed a deal, I think on 15th of January, a trade deal with the US. And in that trade deal is very interesting. There's a American journalist called Danielle DiMartino Booth. And she was interviewed on a show. And she said that there's and I'm just quoting her, that buried in this deal was an out clause, a very clever out clause that the Chinese made sure was in there. That said that if there was any act of God, a pandemic, then they didn't have to make good on what they'd committed to buy from the United States. Now, as per that trade deal, the Chinese had to buy $250 billion worth of goods from America. And under Article 7.6 of that trade deal, there's a force majeure clause that says in the event of a pandemic, they're not obliged to do that. So they have invoked that clause, and I don't think they're going to fulfill the obligations of buying those $250 billion worth of US farm products. So now the issue is that China then decided to use this opportunity as this pandemic as a weapon of opportunity. And they have, it's like the epics. What epics govern Indian behavior? It's the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and the law of karma. But what governs Chinese behavior is the philosophy, which is a systemic philosophy of world domination articulated around the time of Confucius during what is called the spring-autumn period of the Eastern Zhou Empire between 777 to 481 BC, before Alexander. However, the Chinese couldn't implement that policy of world domination. And it's only now that Xi Jinping has found that he has the wherewithal to do so, because they have built up themselves up as an economic power, as a military power. But let me tell you one thing, that their military prowess and their weapons have not really been tested in the battlefield. I mean, the US Army is battle-hardened, Indian Army is battle-hardened, but the Chinese Army is not battle-hardened, and they only have, they have conscripts who serve 2-year terms. So, when push comes to shove, as we have shown in that clash in the Galwan Valley, that for 20 of our soldiers that were killed, the Indian Ghatak platoons of the 16 Bihar regiment, they went in and they knocked off 50 Chinese, and they even brought a colonel back who then was traded for the 10 Indian soldiers who had been captured by an overwhelmingly large number of Chinese. So while the Chinese can demonstrate the weapons, it's a good opportunity to see that whether Chinese technology of reverse engineering is as effective as Western technologies. So that proof of the pudding will be in the eating. If it comes to that, we will know who's better.
So, I want to come to the economic impact of this. What do you see the economic impact of this, relationship not going the way it possibly should have? What is the economic impact on India? Chinese companies are investors in India. Indian supply chain in many businesses, pharma, auto, in electrical components is dependent on the Chinese, sort of producing and supplying us those equipment. So what do you see as the economic impact of this follow?
You see, let's be very clear about one thing, that the Chinese labor market is an imperfect labor market. It is imperfect because it has an absence of collective bargaining. There are no trade unions. There is no such thing as a minimum wage. And the growth of the Chinese economy has been based on an exploitation of Chinese labor. Now the world has actually taken advantage of this exploitation of Chinese labor, and they have allowed themselves to de-industrialize. I mean, for example, this whole process of de-industrialization started 30 years ago when the US began to vacate industries in which there was where there was a comparative advantage for the Chinese to manufacture the product at a very low margin, and the advantage that producer surplus was enjoyed by the US producers. I mean, like, for example, Apple probably pays the Chinese vendor $100 to make an Apple iPhone, and they sell it for $1,000 in the US. So that entire producer's margin accrues to them. And this producer's margin enabled large indirect taxes, large welfare payouts, and large profitability, and also provided employment in the service sector. So the same thing happened in India. I mean, if you look at ceiling fans, these ceiling fans were at one time all made in India, and it's not rocket science to make a ceiling fan. But today you find that every fan manufacturer has outsourced the manufacture to China. So we have suffered that deindustrialization. Now the question is that if these fans were being made in India, there would have been employment, and that there would have also been an employment in the selling of the fans. Right now, the situation is that because the fan manufacturers are enjoying this large producer surplus, they've permitted that manufacture to shift to China. So how are we going to actually decouple from China is going to be the big issue. Can we decouple? Can we go through the pain? Can our companies agree to enjoy lower profit margins? Can growth be tempered? I mean, these are questions that we've got to look at. The other thing is that the issue of the entrepreneur's playing field, it's not a level playing field, because in China you get collateral free credit and you have zero or near zero interest rates. Here the situation is not the same in India. So how are we going to create the basis today to reindustrialize ourselves and compete with the Chinese? That is a big issue that's going to confront us.
Thank you for your opening comment. We'll come back to you. Mr. Ravi, you heard Mr. Malhotra. What are your opening comments in terms of what do you see as the economic fallout of this geopolitical realignment, if I may call it?
So there are two aspects to it. First of all, thank you for inviting me to the show, Dr. Batra. There are two aspects to it. One is the sentiments and other is the ground reality. Sentiments are that we should ban every product which has a barcode of 690, which is a Chinese product on one side. And the other side is the ground reality. And the ground reality is quite different. We are, just to make a clarity, we are importing something to the extent of 68.3 billion USD every annum. And we are exporting to them something like 16.3 billion USD. So the trade deficit is sitting around 45 billion. So which is advantage in terms of trade. That is what China enjoys. Now, is it the right thing? Now, coming to the next part, they have invested more than 6.8 billion in Indian enterprises, which includes 18 unicorn companies like Zomato, Ola, Paytm, and even products like Vivo and then Oppo. All this they have invested. So one factor which we have to understand, when they invest in a complete ecosystem, and the ecosystem consists of online platform, it consists of payment gateways, it consists of even aftermarket services, it also consists of even getting control of data or usage of data. So they have penetrated deep into the trade, and they are at this point
even retailing. When the Chinese, just to support your argument, when the Chinese phone companies have come in, they brought their own retailers to India who set up shop.
Correct. So they have used the Indian consumption, which is huge, and the Indian market to their advantage. Now they having allowed them to penetrate, means the balance is in their favor. I'll give you two more examples, and which is a eye opener for everybody. And I was also surprised when 20% of our airlines are, they are leasing or they are the lessors. I was surprised. Air Asia, we talk of maybe few more airlines, 20% of the total aircrafts that are there in India are leased from the Chinese. Second aspect, if you take the power sector, they have dominated the power sector where there are ports, east and west ports. In comparison to BHEL, which is doing the hard task of taking tough projects, they have taken easy projects on a very big and competitive global tender, competitive and aggressive bidding, they have taken that. So if you see, they have really penetrated deep into the Indian system, and they have mapped India to that extent that what they can get out of India without any sensitivity. Now, we have allowed them this vantage position, and there needs to be a pushback of various methods that we have to use. Some of them which have been exhibited in the past few weeks, including the FDI sort of
automatic
banning the FDI.
It made no automatic route. You have to
no automatic
get a specific approval.
Absolutely. And then coming to also banning the 59 apps. So steps like this, small steps like this, then anti-dumping duty, then also coming to many measures which government of India is taking, and is in the process of taking. Today I read, instead of lithium batteries to be taken from China, they are looking at South Korea and as a destination, Japan as a destination. The committee is already progressing how to substitute the country from China to South Korea and Japan. So I think the economic fallout is going to be there. We cannot wish away the fact. But how can India take up this challenge? There are this challenge can be taken up in a very collaborated manner. For example, I'll give you another example, which will actually it's an eye opener for us, all of us, which we are aware. India has natural resources. We have the highest iron ore content, which we are exporting to China, and they are making electrical grade steel and selling it back, which is used in our transformers and other electrical equipments. No, why did we not set up our own sort of this thing? Because the margin is huge. Why couldn't we put same is with the solar projects, where the silicon, which is the basic raw material, is again coming from China.
So so do we have an end game? Does the Indians have an end game in sight? Is there an end game to this, or it is a tactical way to negotiate? We'll come back to you on that. Let us get Mr. Moses Manoharan in. Moses, you heard both Mr. Ravi and Mr. Malhotra. What are your opening comments on why is China doing this now, and where are we headed, and what is the economic impact in the short term and in the long term?
Thank you, Dr. Batra, for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to be with this august panel. I heard with great interest and respect, of course, for Mr. Iqbal Malhotra and, of course, Mr. Ravi. And I'm sure the other two will be equally perceptive. From where I'm coming from, as a Reuters person, having served in done assignments in Beijing, Hong Kong, and the Far East, and with a language skill, Chinese Mandarin was the second language I learned after English, and my own native tongue Tamil was like fourth or fifth language I learned in life. I must say that first of all, we have, and it amazes me that a country like mine, which I adopted and became a citizen in 1998, it always amazes me that we spend so little time analyzing deeply and producing the scholars to think about this country, which is the most of paramount importance to us. We have enough people in Delhi, especially, who know Pakistan like the back of their hand. There are many experts who go to America, get wonderful degrees, come back, and they know the American system. They know the European system with all these degrees from Oxford and Cambridge and whatnot. But there are very few who are actually immersed themselves in the study of China, the language, the customs, the civilization, and the behavior of the Chinese. So this is, I don't say anyone is people apart, but they are, to some extent, they have certain characteristics which are very unique. And to understand them, maybe it's, for the purposes of this discussion, not necessary, but one thing that we have to understand is they are deep thinkers. They do not believe in, they don't have to, they don't need to, they don't, and it's not part of their psyche to live from day to day or year to year or 5-year plan from 5-year plan. They have, but it's not important for them. They think in terms of quarter and half and centuries and millenniums. And from that angle, we seem to have over the, if we take 70 years of our existence roughly to theirs, which is almost the same, around 47, they were in the early 50s, we must see that this is a progression. India's struggles with China is a progression. And this is my submission. I'm sure people may differ, but China knew where we were going. I think they knew 70 years ago where they're going to land up. They knew that there will be a struggle for leadership of the world. The leadership of the world was a struggle. Okay, we had the old colonial powers. They knew they will wither away. The Americans will be good to go for another few centuries. But what will outlast them will be the two great civilizations, India and China. And Dr. Batra, when I used to attend foreign office briefings in China, in Beijing, they would never say in Chinese, they will never say the India. They will always say the ancient civilization India. They will not say this about too many countries, I can assure you. So they understood this is a civilizational conflict. And in that, now I think I've taken too much time, but briefly on Mr. Malhotra, on the military front, we have two kinds of sins in life, we believe. One is the sin of omission and the other is the sin of commission. In India, it is the sin of omission. We didn't build our assets at the border. We did not foresee what is to come. We did not see the linkage between Tibet, Xinjiang, Gilgit-Baltistan, Gwadar, the impact. We felt it a little time, but we didn't take measures to counter the Karakoram highway. Why it was called Karakoram when it was not near Karakoram. These were the deep aspects of this issue we did not take into account. We did not build the assets. We are now building it. Why? That was a sin of omission, that we did not keep upgrading the armed forces, which were, we had roughly almost, give or take a few $1 billion here or there, almost the same GDP in 1962, 61, 62 as China. How did we fall back? This is a sin of lurching from, we did not have a definite plan. We didn't have whether we were socialists, then we were rightists, now we are free market economists. What is it that we want? The Chinese were very different. They decided they were a socialist country when they wanted to take leadership of the third world. At Bandung, they did it effectively. Prime Minister Nehru, who I respect deeply, gave it away to Zhou Enlai in Bandung in 1952. We lost this battle, according to me, with great respect to everybody, we lost this war in 1955 at Bandung in the conference, Afro-Asian Conference, because Zhou Enlai stepped forward and they took control of the third world. And look at these guys. They said, we were the leaders of the countries emerging from colonialism. They never emerged from colonialism. Why they? And today, the Chinese, believe it or not, count themselves among the developing nations. Now, how is that? And they want a leadership of the developing world, but they want also to be at the G5 and G7 and whatnot as a developed country. They have played it so well, and they've been careful in where they deploy their wealth. I know for a fact, and I studied this, that after the Red Guard Revolution, the Cultural Revolution, they destroyed their economic structure, the educational structure. And from the ashes, they built it in 3 decades. They are now decades ahead of us in education from nothing, because They were focused on education. When I go to China, I see the children in not just in, I go there like roughly, not now, but until COVID, about once every 2 months or so. I see young children, healthy kids. We see our kids who are not. They have a proper health system too. They deployed their wealth properly. We did not accumulate our wealth properly. We did not deploy our wealth. All these are sins of omission. Theirs is a sin of commission in the sense of being cold-bloodedly on the road to world domination. They know what they want, and they're going for it. Now, in conclusion, I would like to just ask Mr. Ravi, as an expert in this, is it not, why are we viewing it as India-China in this trade conflict? We cannot do it after 1991. We signed on to globalization. We signed on to WTO. By nature of it, we are not unconnected. We cannot say we will withdraw from the Chinese market and be on our own. We can't, because we are globalized. The Chinese knew it. Whenever I go to China, they always stress, we have to respect globalization, because they know that their goods are getting a good deal. We aren't. Whose fault is that? Now that O'Neill, I would like to just leave this current talk with a small interesting point. In all the support against coming on disassociating with China and Chinese goods, one very interesting organization expressed concern for our decoupling from China. And do you know what it was? That was the US India Business Council. They said, hey, no, be careful. we are concerned about the decoupling because the world is one. There are so many American makers in China who are bringing their goods here. So this is what my thoughts I leave behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Manu. What I hear from you is that China works very long term. And I agree with you. Look at, they started getting into Africa 25, 30 years back.
Thank you.
They started their plan of globalization in the 60s. So they're long term. They're very good at execution when they make up their mind. They're truly strategic in the sense of the word we use, strategic. So I'll bring in Madhumita Chakraborty, who's our associate editor. And Madhumita, please go ahead and take the discussion forward. And Mr. Manish, who's our editor for strategic affairs. Madhumita, first you and then Manish.
Yeah, I hope Mr. Manoharan will talk more about the culture that he mentioned so lucidly, and the Chinese culture, because what we have seen over the years is the Belt and Road Initiative, by which China has built an infrastructure all around the subcontinent. The entire Indian dependence on Chinese intermediaries and Chinese inputs is not more than 2 decades old. And so definitely, I mean, even as with diplomacy, as with the internal policies, China has worked strategically in becoming the supply chain of the world. But having said that, it is also a fact that this morning and yesterday, we have very strong indications from our government in India that there cannot be a diplomatic and a military standoff and cordial trade relations. Our power minister has said that we will not be importing any more power transmission equipment from China. Our road transport minister has said that the Chinese companies will no longer be welcome in joint ventures. And it is quite clear that till this impasse, this diplomatic impasse is resolved, there will not be normal trade relations with China. And I don't think India will be the only country, because we have heard similar noises from the United States today. India has banned 59 apps. The US is also showing concern about Chinese companies. In the past, Canada has has raised concerns about Huawei. I hope that's the right way to pronounce it. So we are in a situation where all the the diplomatic relations, the trade relations that had been built over the years are suddenly going to be re-examined. And under the circumstances, uh, I do hope Mr. Manoharan, because he has had a Beijing posting, I do hope he does come on. Do you at all see the impasse that we see, the standoff that we see? Do you see a diplomatic resolution to this problem?
If I may
Because
just add, Moses,
yeah,
have we kept the door open? Of course, in diplomacy, you never say never, and you always keep the door open. But do you think banning the Chinese apps is a tactical thing to negotiate better?
If I may be forgiven here, I would say, and people at senior levels who I've talked to over the past few weeks from Beijing, the Chinese officials, what they are more concerned about and what was a bigger body blow for them was the restriction on foreign direct investment from neighboring countries. They knew it was, it's not going to be Bhutan or Sri Lanka investing here. It was going to be China.
Definitely not Pakistan.
Pakistan and Nepal. But what for them, the India, they see as the last great market. There are only 3 great markets left in the world. Europe is gone for the next decade and forever, I guess. They will only trade as independent countries now. What is left is for China is America, which they have found is a volatile relationship and situation. The other is the new biggest trading partner of China, which is ASEAN countries. ASEAN countries, of course, as I was one part of them, they have a strong ethnic and cultural loyalty to the Chinese. So ASEAN remains strong, but a bigger market is India. Anything you touch the Indian market, they are fearful of. So in the end, the Chinese will come back and do a deal with us. They are very good at that in the marketplace. They are excellent. The Indians are no less. They know when they see a good trade, the diplomats will come in, they will talk, they will resolve it, and believe it or not, it will come back to normal and it will be business as usual before
In how many weeks, Moses?
Before the year is out. It will be business as usual.
Anurag, I would like
Well,
to
yes,
make
I
a
wanted to
point
bring
here.
you in.
I endorse what Moses says about the Chinese investment in India. I have a little difference of opinion with Mr. Ravi. He said that Chinese investment in India is $6.8 billion in the unicorns and in high-tech companies. The total Chinese FDI in India is, according to a new study done, I forget the name of the think tank that did it in March 2020, it's $24 billion. So it's not a small sum of money, and 24 billion, and there's much more in the pipeline in terms of pledges. And this 24 billion is in the automobile sector, it's in power, it's in steel, and they've also penetrated the Indian railways. So I endorse Moses' point of view that this is a very, very big market for them. But the fact of the matter is this, that you see, it's not a simple issue now of just India and China. It's a global issue. And the global issue is this, that the terms of trade for the whole world, and particularly the 4 Quad countries of Australia, Japan, the US and India, which are running large trade deficits with the Chinese, the terms of trade are against them and on trade with China, because China sells much more and buys much less. And the second thing is this, that when you cannot have a diplomatic resolution to such a situation, and you may not have a decisive military resolution, the issue is that therefore you go in for the third option, which is regime change. Now, I'll tell you something very interesting, that in 1900, there was something called the Boxer War. In the Boxer War, 8 countries fought against the Qing Empire of China to enforce a new trade regime so that they should be allowed to trade favorably at treaty ports and in the Chinese hinterland. And the trade, essentially, a lot of it was the opium trade, because China was the world's biggest market for opium, and they had the world's biggest collection of addicts, running into hundreds of millions of people. Now, of those 8 countries, 4 countries, India, Australia, Japan, and America, fought together in 1900 to bring about eventual regime change in China and change the terms of trade in their favor. And today, 120 years later, these four countries constitute the Quad. So I see that what is going to happen is that there are fissures within the Chinese Communist Party. There is a power struggle going on there, which is well blanketed. I haven't gone past that bamboo curtain to find out, to actually get authentic information about what is the nature of that power struggle. But it is my guess that there is going to be a lot of brinkmanship, because Donald Trump today is 14 points behind Joe Biden. And Joe Biden today has the election. Trump is a maverick, and he is the only US president who has taken on an activist and volatile front against China. And he's not going to tamely give in and hand over the election to Joe Biden. He's going to do something unpredictable. And that unpredictability, he is going to have the support and do it collectively with the Quad. That is what is my interpretation of things. And I look at it as...
And what could be that unprecedented thing, Iqbal?
I don't know what happens. You see, 3 US carrier groups are now guarding Taiwan, and they're essentially guarding 13 microprocessor foundries owned by the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company.
The largest.
The Chinese imported in 2018 $318 billion worth of microprocessors from Taiwan, Japan, and the US. Now, the Chinese government has told the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company that stop selling high-end microprocessors to America. Otherwise, we'll bomb your factories. And apparently, 2 or 3 of their foundries based in mainland China have been taken over by the Chinese. So the gentleman who owns this TSMC, he spoke to the Americans, and the Americans therefore have sent this battle group, because if, for example, tomorrow, just a precision-guided missile strike that knocks off 13 of TMC's foundries will effectively completely knock off the supply of semiconductors that power everything from mobile phones to satellites for the rest of the free world. So the issue is that, will the US go to war over 13 factories? Now, some people say that this company is investing in Arizona. But that Arizona factory, when it goes on stream in 2024, will only have 3% of the capacity of the current Taiwanese capacity. So it's a very serious issue. I mean, 2 American stealth destroyers have packed up because of faulty Chinese microchips, which had backdoors. There's a British destroyer that packed up. These are $10 billion worth chips that packed up during their trials. And that led to the incarceration, arrest of this Huawei lady who was the CFO. So it's a very complex scenario. And Trump will not give up without a fight, because if he has to claw back and win the election, he has to appeal to not only his 30 million committed redneck voters, but the independents who brought him to power. And today you look at the disguised unemployment in the US, it's not 25 million. It is 50, 60 million, because the US government is giving you handouts to pay your employees today. But the question is that once they stop giving the handouts, because there's only a certain amount of deficit financing that they can resort to, what will happen to the actual unemployment figures at the time of the November elections? Okay. So my bet is that there will be something, I don't know whether it's going to be in Taiwan, whether it's going to be in the space, or it's going to be undersea, but there will be a concerted attempt by the 4 Quad nations. And you can see that the stirrings of that in the Prime Minister's very rousing speech today in Leh, that there will be some kind of action, because the terms of trade have to be changed. And that is a decision that a lot of the world is taken in today. And the Chinese regime, which is actually using its economic clout to exercise get political mileage out of it, will have to be curbed, because there has to be some kind of equality on the world stage. You can't be held to ransom.
Before I get you in, Mr. Ravi, at the end, we are in India. We are worried about how does our companies do? How does our economy do? Do you see, while we continue to build capability in manufacturing and become Atmanirbhar at some stage, do you see in the short term we'll go back to being normal as it was 2 weeks back, or that scenario will never come?
So this Atmanirbhar concept came in principally prior to this sort of face-off between India and China. If you remember, it came 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago. So this government is focused on Atmanirbhar because we have to rely on and we have to create jobs. We have to improve our economy. We have to be self-sustaining. And there are many measures. For example, there is one measure for creating an MRO in India and also rationalization of public sectors. So, and also banning global tenders over 200 crores. So, any tender up to 200 crores will be given to Indian companies. So, there are a lot of reforms that have happened to make India a vibrant and self-dependent country. This is not a short-term process. And the sentiments which go into the border, that is very different from the ground reality. The ground reality is that we have to be self-sustaining. We have to look at alternative investments. We cannot depend on a single country. And depending on a single country, the pendulum is swinging, and we have to move away slowly but steadily. It is not a short-term process. It is going to be. I watched Veera Shankar's this thing with you, and she also said it's not going to be a switch on, switch off type of a thing. It is going to be a long run, slow process. We have to provide employment. We have to get into more industry slowly and steadily. We have to create solar energy, and that's a process. And so, what is India's weakness at this point, and what is China's weakness? India's capital cost is very high. Let us take the capital cost of China is very less. Second, let us see what is China. The sentiments are against China at this point of time after COVID-19. Every country like Australia and Vietnam have banned Huawei. Why did they do so? Because the sentiments are against China. Then the Hong Kong issue, which is there, where there has been a capital outflow from China, from Hong Kong in a major way. And where is the next destination going to be? It's going to be Singapore, Dubai, or it's going to be India. And India has a very good center called the Gift City, which is an international financial center. We should exploit that. And I think we will slowly move towards making it more self-sufficient. And that is what I feel. It's a gradual process. Just banning or taking steps is not going to help. It's a slow process. We have to build capabilities, and we will have to take strong measures internally. And it is not about China versus us. It is about also taking what China's market share, which is going to be lost, how much do we capture, and how do we capture, and how do we increase our ease of doing business so as to get this market to us. So I feel that sentiments apart, we will have to work in a very scientific manner. For example, a committee has been formed to look at quality just a few days ago by Government of India, where quality products will be assessed. So there are many steps that Government of India is taking to ensure that we become self-sufficient. And I don't think it is because it's too much reported about China, but there are many measures which are in the overall interest of the economy.
Thank you so much. Moses, you want to make a point? And Manish, at this point, we must get you in to ask few questions and bring in your point of view. Moses, your comments?
Yes, just a brief comment and then a larger comment for Mr. Iqbal Malhotra and for Mr. Ravi. Mr. Iqbal Malhotra, I am very careful in trying to phrase this, not to upset you, on the Quad. Now, as you very well know, it was a tenet of the foreign policy faith of India not to allow Australia to venture into the regions of the Indian Ocean. This was for 30, 40 years. It was absolute. And suddenly we have taken a backseat. Okay, I agree. We go back to Boxer Revolution, then we would all great together. But we have broken a doctrinal faith, tenet of doctrinal faith, to allow Australia in, and suddenly we are bringing them into the Quad. So, I don't think it's a bad thing or a good thing, but I just think that we need greater consistency over decades, not centuries. Now, on just an aside on the opium, the Boxer revolution, the trade, the reordering of trade, which was enforced by the Western powers with the help of Australians who were also under colonial rule. And us, we were the enforcers, and we benefited from the misery of the addicts of China. And we built fortunes, which I do not want, due to libel action which may be taken against you, Mr. Annurag, Dr. Annurag Batra, that to name the great and respectable business barons who built the fortunes on the misery of the opium trade, Indians. And this is documented. This is not, the Chinese don't bring it up. If it was the other hand, I believe we would have. Now on, this is really surprising. When we voluntarily, nobody put a gun on our heads, we voluntarily signed up when we decided we will liberalize our economy. We signed up to WTO. We moved from GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, we moved to World Trade Organization. Who supported us? They didn't support us. The same way, the RCEP, if you are such a great adherent of all these trade rules and regulations, why don't we sign up to RCEP? We don't sign up to RCEP because our new best friends, Australia, and their neighbors, New Zealand, want RCEP simply because they want entry of their products in dairy, farm products into our market so that more farmers will commit suicide. This is what, and our government has rightly stood up against it. The previous government rightly stood up against the new WTO amendments in the Doha round. We alone, India, nobody else stood up to this. The Chinese know which side their bread is buttered, so they stood up. We for once stood up and halted that. If not, it would have been another round of exploitation by the same guys who were once our colonial powers, along with the US, to wreak havoc on the economies of Africa, try to get in their products. RCEP, we are resisting simply because they want product access. They do not give us the access for our service industry, which is our strength.
And to natural resources. Africa supplies the natural resources part of the world. So you have control over the input that goes into the end product. So I want to bring in Mr. Manish. Manish.
Let's ask one more question to Mr. Ravi. Sorry, I know you are.
No, I just want to bring him in.
Exasperated. Mr. Ravi, please explain to me. You are from, you know the markets well. We say restrict China, there's that. But the trade figures, the investment figures in the capital market, which is the stock exchange, indicates that the biggest investment money coming in, or one of the biggest, is from FPIs, foreign portfolio investors. And you know very well that the origins of FPIs need not be disclosed. So who are the biggest two places it's coming from? Singapore, it's my old country, I hesitate to speak against them. But the other is the Cayman Islands. It's a byword. It's an alias for tax shelters. These are the two. Please explain to me this magic.
So this has been a phenomena, and this has been happening. So let us accept certain facts. And Singapore, even it could be money from China that could come to Singapore, money that could go from China to Cayman Islands and come to India. So that is a very, very a thing which we need not even get into, because that is something that the regulators at least do a KYC and something called as a patka at the first level, because money is so fungible and moves so fast. There can be multiple layers of money that can flow in. So everybody looks at the first level from where it comes, and the trade agreements and the various regulatory agreements do not allow us to go beyond a certain point as far as we are concerned. Even if you see what happened with the Swiss accounts. So, and how many negotiations happened, how many meetings happened, and the agreement was finally signed. So what happens is there is a little bit of opaqueness. I totally agree with you. There is a little bit of opaqueness here, and which we cannot eradicate, because what happens is investors will move to the market where they can make money. They will not go to the market where they cannot make money. It is the commercial consideration for all these people who have idle money or excess money. It will flow to the country and to the place where they can make money. It's as simple as that.
Thank you.
Anurag, may I
Manish?
just make one 15-second point?
Manish.
That
Oh, yeah.
this foreign portfolio investment investors in scheme was introduced by Dr. Manmohan Singh way back in 1991, when the foreign exchange reserves of India were only less than $1 billion, and our gold
Absolutely.
had to be mortgaged by the Chandrasekhar government to the Bank of England. And at that point of time, it was necessary to bring capital into the country. And so this scheme started then, and everybody knows about it, that look, it's that there are tax havens and people like to invest money and keep themselves anonymous. So there's nothing wrong with that, because it happens all over the world.
Right.
May I point out that the Indian government has taken several steps to through strictures on P notes to prevent money coming in from undisclosed sources. So periodically, the North Bloc has
disclosures
stepped.
are there. So the disclosures are there, but unfortunately, you can't go over a level. So you get disclosures, but you cannot go 4 levels up and get from the source.
So why do you need to do that? You're asking someone to invest here. You're not an investigative agency to expose the investors. Nobody will come to your country and invest if you start doing that. This is not a police state.
Mr. Iqbal, Mr. Ravi, I just want to come back to a simple question. Why we all know that the origins of FDI will not be disclosed. We also know, if we check the latest FATF of the Americans, that a lot of the money in the recent months, especially after the trade dispute for US, has flowed from China and Hong Kong, Chinese money, to Singapore. These are all facts. So in other words, I just want to know, why would you ban foreign direct investment from China when it is coming through other sources? This is all. I'm confused. That's all. Sorry.
That is not foreign direct investment. That is foreign portfolio investment. There's a big
It's the
difference
same
between
thing.
it. No, it's not the same thing. It's
Oh,
not
no.
the same thing. No, sorry,
no.
sir.
Oh no, foreign direct investment, you have to disclose. It is disclosed where it comes
Exactly.
from.
Exactly.
That's right.
FPI,
So
you don't have to disclose.
So
Exactly. So
basically,
we if we are getting capital, we turn a blind eye.
Iqbal is more nuanced on it. Broadly, what you're saying, Moses, we understand philosophically what you're saying, but Iqbal's nuanced input is welcome. Manish, are you there?
Yes, Dr. Batra, I'm there.
So Manish is the most knowledgeable amongst me and Madhumita, 3 of us from BW, on these issues. So Manish, your questions and comments?
Yes, of course, to Mr. Moses, I will have a first perspective. He said China was a part of global supply chain and part of the global trade much early, but it is also evident that China used all the tactics, to in their own favor, manipulated the world trade. For example, all the technology the Chinese adopted from the USA, they applied in the China market, but they did not allow American companies, the original tech companies, to work in the China. So that kind of manipulated has been happening in the China, while India just put embargo of 59 apps. China again talk about the WTO reference and all that. I understand it's a global supply chain is a complex issue, but Mr. Moses, where do you see in this trade war we should stop? Our topic is strategic. How we should be strategic? Shall we have a carpet ban with China, or we should be strategic and we see certain sector we can do trade with the 2 largest market in the world? As you said, we are the only big 2 markets in Asia. Emerging India is a complex issue. How do you look at such things, such dichotomy in this current scenario?
I am just saying that we have to accept that this is it's not everyone accepts, I think, it's not a switch on, switch off that we can start becoming Make in India overnight. Everyone is accepting that. So in the long run, what are we trying? Only my humble submission, when we talk all the time about reforming the UN and the UNSC and the permanent members, let us also talk about reforming the institutions, the financial institutions. After Bretton Woods, we had all these things, the IMF, the World Bank, and WTO is the offshoot of these things. These are unjust, inequitable institutions. They have formed these unjust restrictions on WTO. We have stood up to them, but nobody stands up with us. At Doha, we knew who our friends were. None of them. This is the fact.
But again, to interrupt you, Mr. Moses, world did not question China for a long time. Huawei has been doing the breach of data and their connection with the Chinese military is very obvious. There have been the cases in Africa where they have used spying their technology by taking information, which is very obvious. Same in TikTok we're talking about. In 2019, last year, American Senate has started investigation and they come to the point, yes, there was a problem. So world did not question the practices within Chinese tech companies which were investing in India. And then when it comes to China, China give excuses of the global trade and go by the rules. So how you explain that situation? It is time to put China on the dock, put China on the question collectively by nation together. As Mr. Iqbal also, Mr. Malhotra also questioned that through the Quad, through the alliances, how do you think such build-up happening now?
Yes, we can start immediately by switching off Zoom for a start. Anyway, it's just a joke.
Zoom is not Chinese.
US,
it's American.
US.
No,
It's American.
It's a known.
It's a Chinese American. It's owned by a Chinese American.
Let's not kid ourselves here. Okay, we know what Zoom is. Now, the other matter is, I mean, that is a facetious remark. I apologize for trivializing this. But the point remains, nobody put a gun on our heads to sign WTO. We accepted these voluntarily. The Chinese accepted it and abused it. We accepted it and we tried to play according to the rules of the game. And we have now seen what is the end result. But again, I come back, our sin is omission. We should have stood up to the Chinese when? 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Why didn't we? Now it's, shutting the stable door after the horse is bolted. It's now racing in Mahalakshmi racecourse. Too late.
Actually, it's a matter of political will. Why didn't India get into liberalizing its economy in the 1970s? Why did it do in 1991? Because we had no choice. And today we have no choice because that's our sociological, cultural issue. We are slow to become aggressive. We are slow to change. But when we do change, then we change and we make a success of it. We did make a success of getting out of the autarkic license permit Raj in 1991. And we've had spectacular growth thereafter. But today the question is that we have to change with the times and we have to change and confront the Chinese. We can't just sit tight and say, let them run roughshod and the WTO exists because it's an extension of Western colonialism. Well, I think there'll be a new world trade order. There'll be a new trade order after this confrontation with the Chinese, which will change the terms of trade. And at that point of time, we have to have the adequate debating sense and the lobbying power and the interconnectiveness to get the best deal for us in that new world order. This old world order is in shambles today. It's not going to last long.
Yes, to Mr. Malhotra again, we'll have a little bit of geopolitical discussion. Until now, and today, China has again, despite all the COVID-19 and protests around the world, China has declared they're going to have exercise in one of the conflicted zone called Paracel Island, and this China is not stopping now. Inside China Sea, the conflict is increasing now day by day. How should India contain China in the strategy? While at the same time, our allies, Russia, in the middle in the way, while America is still in conflicting and swinging between where should we go. Quad is still on the very fundamental on the paper now, and we have not defined China as enemy until now militarily. What should be the strategy now? How should we contain now at the moment?
Manish, I think you've missed a few points that last year in September, when the Prime Minister was in New York, the level of dialogue in the Quad had been raised to the foreign minister level. It suddenly jumped up from the joint secretary level to the foreign minister level. So today the Quad is at that level. And it was not a military alliance, but it's shaping out to be a military alliance. India signed a trade, this LEMO agreement on logistics with Australia on the 4th of June, 2 days before the Lieutenant General of the Fire and Fury Corps spoke to his Chinese counterpart about his engagement.
That's a bilateral engagement, military
That's
engagement.
Not a bilateral engagement. It's part of the quadrilateral approach. I'm sorry, you can't look at it so isolated. India has a similar agreement with the US and with Japan and with Australia. We had kept the Australians out of military exercises. We kept them out of Malabar, but we are bringing them in. The Australians have a few days ago increased their defense budget by 40%. They say they're going to ensure that they have proper missiles and satellites to be able to defend themselves against the Chinese. And the country that has welcomed that is Indonesia, because Indonesia is suffering at the hands of the Chinese. Taiwan is suffering at the hands of the Chinese. Philippines is suffering at the hands of the Chinese. Vietnam is suffering at the hands of the Chinese. Australians are suffering at the hands of the Chinese. We are suffering at the hands of the Chinese. Who isn't suffering in ASEAN? So, I mean, this is not some on-off switch that you say, oh, this is, this is not a military alliance. These things take time to, get together. I mean, we've been still following that outdated mantra of non-alignment. And
That's right.
in order to now today become aligned and join a military bloc, it takes a certain amount. It has to be sold in the domestic market to the domestic political constituency, because you can't suddenly say, hey, today I'm now in an active alliance with the Americans. I was first saying that the Americans are the CIA and they're the bad guys. Now today they become the good guys. We kept Australia out for 30 years of the Indian Ocean. Today we're bringing them into the Indian Ocean. We're allowing Australian ships to dock in the Andamans. We will dock in their islands, and we will gain, we will exchange supplies, etc. So, I mean, this takes time. It's not something that's going to happen instantly. We are evolving. We are not in a static framework. We are evolving constantly, and we are moving with each challenge. I mean, the trick is that what kind of challenge are you facing on a daily basis, and how are you going to respond to it? Do you have a response mechanism? I will argue that today, yes, there seems to be a response mechanism. And I don't think that the governments that are now confronted with this Chinese brinkmanship are going to disclose all their cards and place them on the open and say, we are doing this, we are doing this, we are doing this. They have to be strategically careful, and they have to be concealed as to what moves they're going to make, because it's a game of go or chess, whatever you call it, and there are dynamic forces at play. So let's not try to, view this as like Sanjay did in the Mahabharata, right from there, and he saw the whole battle going on. The battle is yet to start. People are making their moves, and we'll see they're positioning themselves. So let's see what happens. I mean, the Americans say, we will give you ammunition as much as you want Excalibur ammunition for your M777 howitzers. They're giving you real-time intelligence. The Japanese Navy and the Indian Navy 4 days ago concluded an exercise off the Straits of Malacca. What is the Strait of Malacca? The Strait of Malacca is where 90% of Chinese super tankers from the Middle East pass through to go to China. And if you block them in the case of a war or in a situation like that, or you delay their passage, you're causing pain to the Chinese economy. So, I mean, these are measures being taken. Try and see what's happening today. And then you get a better idea of how we're going to emerge tomorrow.
So there are some questions coming in specific. So first question is to Mr. Malhotra from Tara Shankar Jha. My question to Mr. Malhotra is that I saw an article from you where you emphasize that war is surely going to take place with China. It could be a military war, trade war, political war, biological war, proxy war in terms of Tibet or Hong Kong or Taiwan. So under present circumstances, will it be a one-on-one war between India and China, or will it be China in coordination? I think he's answered it in some way, but you may want to reiterate it.
I don't see a one-on-one war between India and China. If there's going to be a confrontation of a kinetic nature, which means where energy weapons are going to be fired at each other, then I think it's going to be with the Quad versus China, because this is a collective issue. India cannot take on China realistically by itself. India has to have its alliances. And right now, its alliance partners are the US, Japan, and Australia. And these alliances over the next few weeks are going to become stronger and more clearly defined. And moves will be made and strategies will evolve. And people who are reading the signals will be able to get an idea of what's happening. I think the Chinese are very worried today, because they have created the basis for this whole groundswell of collectivization, of collective opposition against them, because this opposition today is becoming vocal.
Fantastic. There is a question for Mr. Ravi, and there is a question for Moses. The question for Moses from Dr. Aparna Srivastava. She says she's loving the conversation. Amazing discourse, absolutely fascinating. One thing that India could have avoided doing to reach where we are with China presently. Mr. Moses, could you please answer that? What could we have avoided? It was one thing if we had to avoid.
I give you a slightly complicated response. And this goes back to Mr. Malhotra. I think it's he says the war is yet to come. I said the Chinese believe it started long ago. We are believing war is got to come. They are fighting the war already, and they have proper plans outright to that. And here, just before I come to you, madam, the preamble is this, and Mr. Malhotra, by I don't know for what reason, has avoided saying two words, and those two magic words are Indo-Pacific. Now, what is it? Is it a fish or fowl? I've asked the
Quad is in some way includes Indo-Pacific.
No.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Please allow me to proceed.
Sure.
The highest levels in India, I've asked, and they've always said, I've asked a simple question: what is Indo-Pacific? Is it a social gathering? Is it an economic grouping? Is it a military alliance? And nobody in India, up to in the military leadership or the political leadership, ever wants to answer this question.
Right.
The Americans, on the other hand, say it is all of the above, and nobody has any idea about the Indo-Pacific. And out of that grew the child of Indo-Pacific, which nobody wants to accept, is the Quad. Now, my personal view, after knowing them and after being based in Indonesia also, and I'm also an Indonesian Bahasa speaker, is that Indonesia's it's a racial conflict with the Chinese, but they are not willing to go against the Chinese over Natuna or anything like that. This is my understanding of it. Now, on the Quad, one Australia is born every year in India. You think these Johnnies are going to come there and stand up to the Chinese? No. The only country apart from US which existentially can stand up to the Chinese is the Indians. They are the ones. We have a philosophy, we have a civilization, we have the depth of population, we have the economy and the potential of the economy.
We're coming towards the end of the show, so
I want
a direct comment on what is the one thing India could have avoided to get where it has got with China? And then there's a question for Mr. Ravi on manufacturing, which I want to.
I don't want to say this, but I cannot avoid this because you are asking, and Dr. Pranav, I believe that there is some confusion in our diplomatic response, which is not always in line with the intelligence agencies and the military. So if we had coordinated it properly, especially the diplomatic, we would have been able to forestall it. This is no reflection on my friend Vikram Misri in Beijing at the moment, representing our interests very well. But we have, there is a changeover from one approach in MEA to another without naming names. So that approach, in that, some things got stalled, and if that had not happened, we would have had a proper diplomatic approach and averted all this. This is my view.
Thank you. Mr. Ravi, Dr. Govind is asking, China is indulging in all kind of war with neighbors, and USA concentrated on IT, BPO, whereas China concentrated on manufacturing. And that's how it built the capability in the economy. So, you know, what should we do as a country? Hence, the Prime Minister push of Make in India, whether it may reach its full potential in the next few years or in a longer period of time, is in the right direction. What do you think we should as a country take steps which will help us economically? Which will help our...
There are three steps first and foremost. First is to provide an ecosystem for manufacturing. The second thing is in the announcement that came from the Finance Minister providing industrial lands for manufacturing in clusters where all the facilities are available together. So that's the path we have to take. We started with SEZ, which did not work, unfortunately, but this is the time where we can build up the facilities through industrial clusters. And I think we have very well-defined sectors where we can improve our manufacturing facilities and import substitution. And that is the mantra where we have got to become self-reliant. And manufacturing facilities, like we are talking of solar, that's an area, because non-conventional energy is going to be the order of the day. So, so we have to change gears and enable us to have manufacturing facilities where we have port facilities, we have ease of doing business. All this has to be enabled to make it very competitive, because at the end of it, it is all about economic viability. If Chinese can produce something at a lower cost, people will go for them. Unless we become economically viable, this whole endeavor is not going to last.
Okay. I think we are wrapping up the show. We'll take final comments from each one of you and a comment from Madhumita and Manish also. Iqbal, your final comments.
My final comment was, you asked, I think, Moses, what is characterized India's policy towards China. I think for 70 years, it's been appeasement. And I think that what happened is that in the 1950s, the political leadership of India was at that point of time so keen on creating this edifice of non-alignment, which was predicated on the basis of Chinese support, that India bent over backwards to appease the Chinese and let them do what they wanted to do. And the first thing that we surrendered were the extraterritorial rights that we had in Tibet. And Tibet was a buffer between India and China, and we brought the Chinese to our doors. And suddenly the defense of India from there was a line drawn through central Tibet, which the Ministry of Defense had worked out in 1947. That line was wiped out, erased, and it was brought to our doorstep. And we've seen how they've encroached, and they're still trying to encroach because they know that we've appeased. So, I mean, we have to now stand up and change our entire mindset and change our doctrine and think about what our interest is and where our self-respect is and where our dignity is as a nation. We can't be pushed and overawed by the Chinese. On the one hand, they start ripping us off. They're even selling us agarbattis. I mean, it's a matter of shame. So I think it's time to change and look for a different future where we have our dignity and self-respect, and we are not having to pull back, push back, and everybody's talking about finger 4 and finger 8. I mean, finger 4 and finger 8 are part of Aksai Chin. Aksai Chin belongs to India, and they're sitting in our territory for 70 years, and we're talking about whether they'll move back from finger 4 to finger 8. I said, let's see whether they'll move back all the way back to Haji Langar, which was the border of Ladakh and Xinjiang.
Thank you. In fact, if I may make a comment from my conversation with the ambassador yesterday, and she made a very valid point that, you know, China wanted to be making sure that India doesn't go closer to anybody else. But by what China is doing, it is ensuring that India, to balance, will get closer to the US. Do you endorse that, Iqbal?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Moses, your closing comments?
I think this is a clash of civilizational approaches. The Chinese believe in a materialism, and we believe in spiritual values. So in the long run, our civilization will triumph, I believe, because you cannot conquer the world on materialism. It has never been done. The West conquered the world on Judeo-Christian values, whatever, good or bad, but that were values. The Chinese have no values. It's only materialism, what I can get on prosperity. And that is not going to do the trick. We have spiritual values which can be an alternative to the Judeo-Christian values. So that's why we will conquer the values. And one last passing comment, I'm too tempted to leave Iqbal alone. It is not, I want to correct myself. The war with China did not start, if you bring in Tibet issue, it did not start 70 years ago, but it started when one Prime Minister of India wrote in his book long before becoming Prime Minister, called Discovery of, not Discovery of India, his other book, the Discovery of India, or the other book, I forget. Anyway, he accepted that India accepts the suzerainty of China over Tibet. The game was over before 70 years, Iqbalji, I'm sorry to say.
But Moses ji, the fact of the matter was that India had soldiers in Tibet, and India never recognized its own suzerainty over Tibet because we had extraterritorial rights. The Indian army moved in 1902 under young husband. The Tibetans signed treaties. They became actually a suzerain power of India. But the Indians and the British kept on saying that no, Tibet is a suzerain power of China. I mean, this was a paradox.
And you know, the fact that they have control over Tibet has let them come closer to, you know, Indian territory and build logistical support. Same for Nepal. Today, they are able to do whatever they are able to do in Nepal because of that. Mr. Ravi, your final comments, and then I'll take comments from Manish.
To answer this, the author of Glimpses of World History wrote that before he became Prime Minister of India, that the suzerainty of Tibet was China's. So
that was his view. And we are suffering because of that for 70 years.
Mr. Ravi.
plus you're on the same plane.
So my view is all these incidents, the conflict in the border, COVID-19, and the global suffering that everybody is witnessing is a wake-up call. And it is a wake-up call for realignment economically, for trade, and also to ensure that there is no superpower which can destroy the world. Means my view is everybody is going to get realigned economically. India is going to become self-reliant through incentives to the industry, and India is going to make itself less dependent on anybody, leave it US or China. I don't see India-China face-off. I see that India's own strength is its people, its domestic market, the depth of internal consumption, and that is what, and the manpower that is available to us, we should capitalize on that. And that is going to be the strength. And that is what I feel should be capitalized through right policies and measures.
Thank you so much. My colleagues, if I weren't there, they would have given in more input. They're themselves expert. Manish, is your nuanced point of view?
Yes, Dr. Batra, I think, of course, we lost some ground while we could not define our adversary, our doctrinal definition about who is our real enemy, what is coming. We had intelligence, but we did not prepare our capability now. So first, time has come. We must define who is our enemy, build up capability as the advanced country, the US has defined. And second, the economic part of view, while we have our national security, we have taken right step banning TikTok and some of the apps, but it's also, we must look the broader picture. I think we should not have a carpet ban, but a strategic ban of some of the industry from China, which hurts more. And as a tool nation, things will continue. So we should be trading this part until we become the great nation and that capable. So that's my remark.
Madhumita ji.
Yes, Dr. Batra, I can't help saying that it was a very, very interesting discussion, and most of the panelists are very well versed in the subjects they have spoken on. But I think we should not forget some things that we all know basically. A is that India has never deviated from its commitment to non-alignment. India has also never deviated from its commitment to free trade. India was among the founding signatories of the World Trade Organization, and China came in much, much, much later after a lot of hemming and hawing. And because we have been steadfast in our commitment to the WTO, notwithstanding what happened at Doklam, which was not our territory but Bhutan's, where Indian Army had to step in because the Chinese had wandered into territory that wasn't theirs. Notwithstanding the periodic skirmishes that we have, India has continued in good faith to trade with China, which is how China has been able to make inroads into Indian industry, and this dependence has now grown. But I think what has panned out since June is that, I can only think because I'm not really part of the system. We are just looking on and reading what is in the newspapers, is that I think it has dawned on our policymakers that it is time to send a signal that you cannot wander into my territory, you cannot kill my men, you cannot martyr my soldiers, and then expect us to also indulge in free trade in good faith. So what we are witnessing in this June is a situation that probably does not have any precedence in our 70-year history, and I don't see an easy solution, but I don't know whether we are correct in assuming it's a clash of civilizations, but I don't see trade resuming with China till a diplomatic resolution comes. I mean, that is my view. I may be right. So,
I said last comment, but Iqbal, do you see trade resuming with China in the next 2-3 months? Yes, no answer.
I don't think trade has been curtailed with China. I think trade is still continuing.
But containers are lying at Indian, ports, and they've not been with Chinese components.
Those are signals being sent out.
Yeah.
I mean, we have not abrogated trade with China, and we don't want to abrogate trade with China.
But we're sending out a message that we won't take it lying down.
Yeah, exactly. We're sending out a message. I mean, we're delaying the consumers from enjoying the benefits of that trade, and we're delaying the Chinese also from enjoying the benefits of the trade. So it's all a par for the course in the present circumstances.
We can go on talking about China. So thank you, Iqbal, for joining us. Thank you,
most welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Ravi,
very much
for contributing to the discussion. Hopefully, in the next 30-60 days, we'll again come back to you and get your inputs on where we are headed. I'm sure in the next 30 days, hopefully there'll be a de-escalation, because war is something that India definitely doesn't want. It is being pushed into a war, both at the border and in terms of a war when it comes to business. India has never, ever in its history, ever made the first move on any other territory. So we are, as a country, only responding and sending a message that enough is enough. We won't lie down. And so I hope it leads to a kind of tempering down of things and de-escalation. And in some way, Indian economy and business finding its own feet in manufacturing, so that over the next 5 to 10 years, we can actually build that Atmanirbharta or self-reliance that the Prime Minister talks of. Thank you once again, Mr. Iqbal Malhotra, Mr. Moses Manoharan, and Mr. S. Ravi for joining. Thank you, my colleagues Madhumita, Chakraborty, and Manish for joining. We look forward to seeing you on another BW Dialogue very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Batra. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.